Hi, my name is Bernardo Vieira, and I'm doing a presentation on vitamin D supplements in prevention of cancer and cardiovascular disease, which was an article written by the New England Journal of Medicine. As a disclaimer in the beginning of this experiment or study, it is said that it is unclear whether supplementation with vitamin D reduces the risk of cancer or cardiovascular disease, and all data from randomized trials are limited. Essentially, what it is that the few, if any, research done on this specific topic about supplementation of vitamin D in results in what it is like to measure the risk of cancer or cardiovascular disease, there's very few of it, and if there is, the results are very limited, and it's not exactly backed up by evidence. Now, this specific rationale behind this experiment is that in many different studies and laboratory research, it is said that when exposed to sunlight, there are far fewer deaths by cancer or by cardiovascular disease. What that means is that essentially, when people are exposed to sunlight, there's a lot less people who die from cancer and from cardiovascular disease, and sunlight is a huge source of vitamin D. So the people who are running this study, the basis of it, or the rationale behind it, is that sunlight or vitamin D decreases the death by cancer or cardiovascular disease. But what is said is that there is no proof that this is true, and this specific experiment does not take into consideration that some people are active adiposity, which is how much fat they have, what they eat, and other factors that can't be measured, like genetics and other stuff, which would be a lot more extensive research, and there would not be able to have that many participants. Therefore, the results would be limited, and all of these factors aren't really enhanced necessarily by the sun or vitamin D, but by other factors like humans and other things like that. Another part of this is that there have never been any other experiments done on this large of a scale. This specific experiment has around 25,000 participants, and it's based off of 2 supplements, specifically vitamin D3 and marine N3, which is also known as omega-3. And the disclaimer that they have on this specific part is that there are not any other experiments that have had greater or equal to 10,000 participants, and this study follows 25,000 participants. Now, the methods of this experiment it's a placebo-controlled trial, and it is designed to have a 2x2 factorial design, which is a double-blind design, which shows that there are some people were given either the vitamin D3 or the marine N3, and neither the participants nor the scientists who gave these pills know which one is which. So it means that they did not really know who had the placebo and who had one of the actual pills. Now, this specific experiment, the supplementation was given for approximately 3 months, and around 5 years after the results were measured. This specific study measured 25,871 participants, and the participants included women over the age of 55 and men over the age of 50. And for inclusive purposes, for different inclusivities, there were approximately 5,106 black participants. They do not specify which gender, male or female, or specific age, as in right over 50 or much older, like in their 80s. And also the participants had no history of cancer or cardiovascular disease, and when they say cancer, they are excluding non-melanoma skin cancer. Now, the method of this experiment, of this study, specifically has two endpoints. The first endpoint is if these two factors affected invasive cancers and major cardiovascular events, and then the second endpoint is if it affected site-specific cancers such as prostate, breast, and colorectal cancer. What it affected, how it affected death from cancer, and also any additional cardiovascular events. Now, in this part, it shows the exact procedure of how the participants were picked. As you can see, a large amount of participants were selected, and then it got cut down to about a tenth of them were actually willing to participate, and then 13 were excluded because of certain regimens and stuff, and they were unwilling to participate. Then it came down to the actual people who went, and then 12,000 were given an actual amount of the pills, and the other were given the placebo. And then at the end, it is shown there that 22,863 were alive, and then about 2,000 were alive but weren't there to conclude, and about 1,000 died in total. Now, the results. At the end of the study, there was a follow-up period with the participants of about 5.3 years, and the concluding evidence showed that vitamin D was not associated with a lower risk of either of the primary points or the secondary points. And it also showed that about 1,617 participants were diagnosed with cancer. About 793 were in the vitamin D group, and about 824 were in the placebo group. And another 805 participants were diagnosed with a major cardiovascular event, and 396 were in the vitamin D group, and 409 were in the placebo group. And another part, as you can see, this is a big table. That first part was the primary analysis, and the second part is the secondary analysis, and it shows about a hazard ratio of 0.83 of cancer deaths. There were about 341 cancer deaths, and then it has a hazard ratio of 1.02 for breast cancer, and then a 0.88 for prostate cancer, and 1.09 for colorectal cancer. And you can see how that is measured through here in the characteristics, and then is the total number, and then the vitamin D group is here, and then the placebo group is here, and there's a little table at the end which can show you exactly how to navigate these results. Now, these are some important tables and charts. To the left, there is a chart that shows the inclines of the hazard ratios, and then to the right, there's a table of the specific hazard ratios of cancer, cardiovascular disease, and different parts of the study. And then this is another chart. These two are condensed into one, and it shows the subgroups of age, sex, race, body mass index category. It shows the vitamin D, the usage, and the randomization of the parts per trial. Now, in the end of the results, on the end of the study, it is shown that there are many different factors that relate to it, but it did not yield any significantly lower incidence of invasive cancer or major cardiovascular disease. And it also resulted that vitamin D supplementation did not lead to lower incidence of total cancer-related deaths or lower incidence of breast, prostatic, or colorectal cancer compared to those of the placebo pill. As you can see in the results earlier, it is seen that they're almost right down the middle, so it didn't really make a difference if they were supplied with vitamin D or with the placebo pill. They were still almost identical. And finally, it did have a secondary conclusion, though, that participants with a lower BMI that were supplemented with vitamin D showed a lower incidence of cancer and such than the placebo pill, but it was too few to have a substantial conclusion. But what that essentially means is that people who had a lower BMI that were supplemented with the vitamin D did have less incidence than that of the same people with that low BMI that were not supplemented with vitamin D. But that does not overtake those participants with obesity. So what the study showed as a secondary conclusion is that if you had a lower BMI, regardless, participants that were supplemented with vitamin D did show a lower incidence of those of the placebo pill. To conclude, because I already went over my 10 minutes, this analysis and study showed that vitamin D supplementation does not affect if one is going to die from cancer, but in people with lower BMIs or lower body fat percentage, then vitamin D can help, but including other risk factors, vitamin D supplementation does not matter.